of things before I kind of sort of close off these opening remarks and maybe get into a more interactive mode, if I may. So some folks have asked that, well, why Lagos, right? Because Lagos is doing better than most other states, right? And there's a mantra by the ruling sort of party that, Lagos is working. That's what they say. But the question that we ask is that, who is Lagos working for? Who is Lagos working for? And if you take objective metrics across a range of areas, and you measure Lagos across those areas, you will find, in our view, that Lagos, rather than being a leader, is in fact a laggard. And if you measure it, particularly in terms of the resources that Lagos has at its disposal, in relation to the resources that other states have at their disposal, that point is even markedly so. So whether this is infrastructure, and by infrastructure in Lagos, you're talking about transportation infrastructure, you're talking about power, you're talking about water, you're talking about waste, broadband, all of those things, security infrastructure. In each of these areas, you can point to the fact that Lagos is dramatically underperforming its potential. There's no reason why the average commute for a Lagosian needs to be sort of around 4 hours, right? Apparently, and I was reading this in a World Bank, I think it's either World Bank or maybe IFC report. And the allusion was that actually the commute times in Lagos are about the highest in the world for the average commute in Lagos. Add to that waste, power in a city like Lagos. Right here now, we're on generator. I know many of us have that experience. It's a national problem, but you ask the question in Lagos, with all of its resources, with the concentration of commerce, what more could Lagos have done to position the city to be the center of commerce, center of finance, hub of activity that it needs to be, to support the population that it does. And we think a lot more could be done, even in the context of power, which, as you know, is a national issue. But there's so much that you, as a state government, one can do, things like embedded power, etc., to improve relative positioning. So infrastructure, a range of areas needing leadership, whether it's education and the quality of education. The median age in Nigeria is about 18. Now, think about that. That means 1/2 of the population is less than the age of 18. Education is central and critical. And the quality of education, I'm sure I don't need to lecture anybody on this call about the quality of education. And there's a lot that needs to be done. Folks who cannot afford it are struggling to send their kids to private schools because people are opting out of the public school system, and that need not be the case, particularly in Lagos. People cannot give what they don't have. Yeah. So you have to go in there and think about the quality of the teachers. You have to think about the curriculum, and we think the curriculum needs to be revamped. We think that, for example, also that we need to expand not just traditional options, but we also need to expand vocational options, because in a city with the population of Lagos, not everybody's going to get desk jobs. Indeed, not everybody's cut out for desk jobs. Not everybody wants the desk jobs. Some people would rather get out there and work with their hands and start to build businesses, which is what tradesmen do. And we need to support them, and government's role is to support and provide the framework for these. And at the end of the day, remember that with a population this young, it's only a matter of time before those numbers turn into unemployment numbers. And we're seeing that. And we think that a lot could be done at a foundational level to better prepare the folks that we have for the economy that we have, so that it's a better fit and so that we can absorb these folks.
Right.
Many of us know that if looking around, we know either ourselves or somebody we know who has struggled to find a good plumber, a good electrician, a good mason or what have you, in a city with so much population, right? Because people do not have the options to attain excellence in those fields, which is very needed in an economy like Nigeria and Lagos, and to which, and which folks are happy to pay for those services. So there's a mismatch there, which I think needs to also be fixed. If you take health, you guys know a lot more about health than I do. But clearly this is another area where people have opted out of the public sector services, not because the buildings are not there, not because the health centers are not there. Yes, they may be under-equipped, but it's really more about the service that they receive in those facilities. They do not trust those services to act in their interest. They believe that if they go there in a critical emergency, they're more likely to die when they need not actually die. And that goes, and it's true for primary care, and it's true for critical care. These two elements of the barbell, right, I think are critical areas, and I can talk more about this strategy. So, across a range of areas, and I can go on and on, it is clear that the progress that we ought to have made in 25 years of one ruling party, 25 years, one generation, the progress that we ought to have made is a far cry from where we are. If we look at it with objective lens, if we compare those who were at the same state of development with us 25 years ago, and look at some of the examples of those who have done a good job, and then look at where they are today in relation to where we were, it's actually a rather sorry story. So this is in answer, a rather long answer to your question of why, but I think it sets a good foundation for thinking about Lagos. I will just add one last thing before I close on this matter, and then make it interactive. So at the foundation, at the root of all of this, because all of these are symptoms. So at the root of all of this, really is a simple thing. And that is the disconnect between the actions of leadership and the interests of the people. To the extent that you have that disparity or disconnect or misalignment, whatever you want to call it, another 25 years could elapse and you will be in the same situation. And the reason is because people are making decisions who are vested with authority to make those decisions, are not making those decisions in the public interest, in the unbiased public interest, which is what leads to development. They're making those decisions based on a range of other factors, including vested interests of those party interests of those around them, their own interests, their family interests, and we see a picture of state capture, which is particularly egregious in the case of Lagos. And I think that this is something that we have to break, and 2023 is our best chance yet of breaking it. And I've stepped forward to lead that charge, and I'm hopeful that as I look back behind me in stepping forward, that I will see a group of support behind me. And I'm hopeful that many of the folks on this call today will be found in that group. Thank you, Emeka.
Yeah, very well said. That's a very elaborate and comprehensive manifesto you just read out there. And I see it appears you're getting all charged up for the campaign tours. Well, so very, very elaborate, very concise, and I think Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, you know what, it's the same, you know, at the end of the day, it's a simple story and people understand it because they live it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking today because I'm speaking to doctors. You hear me speaking in very sort of articulate,
Right.
sort of very polished English, etc.
Yeah.
When I go to Badagry or I'm in Nigeria,
Right.
whatever, you know, I'm speaking in Pidgin, I'm speaking in Yoruba, mixing it with English. But you know what? Foundationally,
Yes.
at the root of it, the message is the same. People understand that the reason why their lives are the way they are is because those who are in office making decisions are not acting in their interest. People understand it.
Yeah.
But they just need to hear it in their own language.
Very well said. Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. For many of us who are on this platform presently, I mean, it will not surprise you that Funso has extremely gifted leadership skills. I can testify to this because in secondary school he was a what called a class captain, form captain for a large portion of his years in King's College. So he's always possessed that strong leadership capacity. Okay, but Funso, you know, let me tell you a narrative. You know, it's something that's always bothered me. We live in a very interesting society where there's a lot of wealth, but there seems to be just a huge disparity in terms of just appreciation for the value of human life. So something that a good example is sometimes you drive on the streets of Lagos. I grew up in Lagos for the most part of my life. I live in Abuja now. But on the streets of Nigeria, mostly, we often will have either policemen conducting traffic. Then if the street lights are not working, they will either come and do their job as road traffic wardens. But Nigeria is a very peculiar situation that we will sometimes even beg for either a madman, quote unquote, or a child to conduct traffic. And we'll gladly just follow that's little child conducting traffic because there's some semblance of leadership there. And I think that's what we're trying to address here, that in a society where there's been such a huge gap and disappointment of leadership structure, you know, Lagos, for example, we know what's going on in Lagos. Like you said, there's this big facade, say all those antics and rhetoric have been used. But my question is now back to you, Funso. Why do you think you're the person that can truly be the person, the individual, the one person that can be a catalyst of change in a stick like Lagos? Why do you think you possess that capacity?
Thank you. So I think that you know, if you look at Lagos's situation, remember where I started from. I said it's a failure of leadership, and a lot of the problems that we have stem from the failure that comes from the top, right? It's a failure in terms of setting the right tone. It's a failure in terms of discipline. It's a failure in terms of modeling the right values, and then having the courage and the conviction to insist that those values, those behaviors are pushed through the system, right? I don't think that we are a unique or unusual or, you know, a race of people that is like, you know, special, right? I think people respond to incentives. People respond to rewards, and they respond to punishment, right? And if you create the right incentives and the right reward punishment structures, and you insist on them, and you are fair, even-handed, and consistent, you will produce behaviors from the same group of people that will be dramatically different from those that will be produced under a different leader with different with a different approach. I also think that there is not a lot of the problems that we see in the public space, i.e. when you go on the street and you see people behaving in a particular way.
Can you mute your mic, please? Kate Thompson, please mute your mic.
If a lot of the problems we see in the public space, i.e. when you go on the streets and you see people behaving in a particular way and all of those elements of indiscipline, I think a lot of it has a root in the public sector. The public sector now, I mean the those in leadership and the public service and the civil service, right? Because those are the people who set the rules, who also police the rules, right? And if people are policing rules, not because they want people to comply with those rules, but because they want a payday from people who are not complying with the rules, then you're going to see one set of outcomes, right? Which is that people will continue doing those things and pay their way through, and everybody's kind of happy because, you know, the people policing get their payday and the people who want to do what they want to do get to do it, etc. But I think if the tone is set in the public sector, in public leadership, in the civil service, and that this is what we do not accept, and that comes all the way from the top. And the guy at the top is not in a glass house, which prevents him from throwing stones. He is leading by example and then insisting that those values will be demonstrated by those people to whom, or those people that report to him. I think you will see that. And I think you will see it. People say that, can you really do that in the public sector? You know, that, and I don't think the public sector is intrinsically different from the human beings in the public sector. I don't think they're intrinsically different from the human beings in the private sector. I think they have been conditioned to certain incentives, certain reward systems, certain behaviors, certain punishment systems, and their behaviors essentially reflect that. And I think that, you know, I bring a resolve. I bring, in addition to sort of competencies developed over many, many years, I bring a resolve, a commitment, and a conviction to act in accordance with what I've said. And I think I've done this and I've demonstrated it in the, you know, in my professional history. So I think really that is what you need. I think you need a competent leader, but you know, we have a lot of smart people around. I think that beyond smart, you need somebody who is, you know, who is committed to doing the right thing and is bringing a conviction and a courage to insist that those things be done.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you very much for that answer. Again, taking it further, please, if you can have your video on, if it's possible, it will probably help the conversation and stimulate the conversation even further. But if you're not, that's quite okay. Also, sending your questions so that we can have them lined up for Mr. Funso Doherty. Mr. Doherty, Funso, I have a little situation here now. Obviously, this we're right on the DFC platform, Doctors for Change. So charity begins at home. So I would like to sort of concentrate it towards healthcare for just a minute. Okay, let's talk about healthcare.
Yep.
A scenario that we're seeing all too often now, even more than ever, is literally the jackpine of a lot of young doctors outside the shores of Nigeria for valid good reasons.
Would that be a technical?
Your father was
this Japan, is that a technical medical term?
No. It's a lingo. It's a lingo. So Japan, yes, exactly. So, you know, yeah. So your father was a medical doctor, very successful, was able to trained his children adequately in Nigeria, gave them very good primary, secondary education, that in university as well, that we all available, and the evidence is quite clear through you. But you see, a lot of my colleagues are struggling presently, and that often is the number one reason why the thought of leaving the country, the shores, leaving the country they love, are familiar with, is so appealing. You know, as the governor of Lagos State, what do you think you'll be able to add to incentivize a better working scenario condition for doctors, not just doctors, nurses, pharmacists, anyone who's engaged in healthcare? How can we package Lagos, for example, into like a Dubai that most would go for medical tourism? How can we package Lagos into like an India that people just get on the plane and start going to India for medical needs? You know, how can we transform Lagos into a medical hub for West Africa and Africa in general? Over to you, Funso.
Okay, thank you for that question. So, I mean, there's a lot to do in the medical area, as you know, and obviously, one of the things that we do as we develop our policy is to engage with experts in each of the areas. So, in the medical area, there's a whole range, obviously, of different areas where that engagement is happening and needs to continue to happen. And I'm sure we'll be reaching out to folks on this call in some of those engagements. Look, I think there are multiple dimensions to the issue. First of all, I think that let's even start from the foundation. I think that the issues that we talk about with respect to quality of education, generally across Nigeria, are not, the medical sector or medical education is not immune to that. And so the things that we're saying we need to do with respect to improving quality of education, I think, also relates to the medical field. Now, having said that, these same doctors that are produced by these facilities are the ones that, or many of them anyway, leave the system and plug into other systems across the world and maybe retrain, maybe do exams over or what have you, but they plug into those systems. So in a sense, that's a real loss. The second aspect of it has to do with, obviously, compensation. And this is a problem that is not, again, unique to the medical field, but very, very sort of stark in the medical area, again, because of the disparities that exist between quality of life of physicians, or the average young physician in this country and the average young physician in those other climes, right? One of the things that we have said is that we believe that people should be better compensated. And when we talk about public sector reform, and we talk about insisting on people doing the right thing, insisting on integrity, and so on and so forth, an integral part of that is ensuring that you're paying people a decent wage, right? So you want efficiency on the one hand, integrity on the other, but you also have to address the compensation issue for equity, right? And so we think that that is something that needs to be addressed. And, it's a problem that is a widespread problem. But again, I think that, to the point you made, Lagos State can become an oasis because Lagos has, a resource endowment. Yes, it has a large population, but it has a resource endowment that is more than many, right? So we can start to begin to build the core of an oasis here. And it may not go around everybody from day one, but we can start to build it out and start to build centers of excellence and so on. Now, beyond compensation, there's also the conditions under which people work, right? So are those conditions that will motivate people, right? A lot of the time, the outcomes that we see in terms of patient care outcomes and the way patients are treated are a function of, they say you cannot, if your staff, if you don't have, if your staff satisfaction is low, your customer satisfaction is going to be low as well. That's true in the private sector. It is no less true in the public sector. So it's important to create those conditions. And again, incentives, rewards, supervision, management, etc., that create working environments that make people humane, right, in their interactions with others, interactions with subordinates, interactions with superiors, and interactions with their patients. And then, obviously there's the whole question around then moving on to, centers of excellence, which is what is fueling this whole, medical tourism to places like India and so on and so forth. And, that is another aspect of it. And you see the private sector coming in to try to address that niche. Obviously, the folks who are going to India or wherever to seek care are people who can afford it, right? So people see that commercial opportunity and are establishing or trying to establish world-class hospitals to capture it. I think that does not have to be the full-fledged focus of government. Government can do a whole lot around primary care and critical care, and just providing that primary care component and that chronic care component that people need of a high quality, so that people opt to come to those facilities, right? So there's no easy answer. There's no silver bullet. There's nothing that we will say we will do that will transform it in 1 year. But we can certainly start to lay the foundation within a year or two. And with the idea that within Lagos, we can start to build a model environment. And then from there, sort of organically grow it out. And government can actually be a leader in this with its own facilities. And I believe Lagos can afford it if things are well managed, if people set the right priorities. Lagos can begin to model it with its own facilities. And then from there, it can then spread out. A lot of the time, I will just add this.
Right.
A lot of the time, what is needed to make the system work, or what is most needed to make the system work well. And it goes back to this thing I said about the misalignment between the actions of leadership and the interests of the people. A lot of the time, what is most needed to make the system work well are not the actions that are pursued, right? So I'll give you a simple example, which is stylistic and, it's maybe simplistic, but captures the essence. So what may be needed in a particular context may actually be training of staff, institution of quality supervisors, quality management, setting quality control systems, monitoring those systems, ensuring you have the right processes, right? And then improving people's compensation so that they feel motivated and deliver good care, right? In that scenario, you may have a leader that decides that, what we need to do is award a contract to build another health facility, 5 kilometers away, right? Because, it's a capital vote. You get to award a contract, and there are flows associated with them, vested interest, even in the commissioning of those projects and the award of those projects, etc. Right? So that's the more attractive thing to do, right, than the former, which actually is what you need to do, right? So again, beyond all that's been said, if you take away or if you align basically in an self-interested way, the actions that you take as a leader, the best thinking and practice associated with the problem you're trying to solve, and implement it in an unbiased, outcome-oriented way, I think you will see a lot more progress than we've seen within a short space of time.
Okay, very, very, very good. I think we're moving right along here. Thank you very much for that very good response in regards to healthcare, particularly as it pertains to Lagos. We will start reading out some questions on the platform. But before we do that again, just because of my bias towards healthcare, if I had to ask you a question or make a statement and just respond as a gubernatorial candidate, that should healthcare be a right or a privilege? Should healthcare be a right of every citizen of Lagos State or a privilege?
I think it should be a right. I think it should be normatively. It should be a right. At least basic health. We may not provide, the top end of, end of life cancer care and all of that stuff. That for everybody, right? But basic good health care, I think, in a modern society, in a modern society, developed society, which is what we're aiming towards, actually should be a right. Should be a right. It may take us some time to get there, but it should be a right, and certainly that's what we should be aiming at.
Yeah, I agree. Let's just take one or two questions for sure from our audience here. Mr. Ikenwachku says, what specific actions are you taking to engage the youths whose votes clearly are there to be grabbed and will be key for the next election nationally, but I think more so in Lagos State?
So it's a good question, and we have a number of ways in which we've thought about this. At one level, at the party level, the youth demographic is central, and so even in terms of internally, in producing candidates for office, there is to contest for office, there's almost an affirmative policy, in terms of engaging the youth in that process, so that we have a youth perspective in everything that we're doing. And as a campaign team, and we just had a meeting today, and this was one of the key things that we talked about as well, to ensure that the face of what we're doing, and not just the face, but even the operations and the internal and the policy are all reflective of the youth component of our demographic, which, as we know, is the majority of our demographic. So one of the things that we've talked about, which we're in the process of doing now, is having actually a youth council within our campaign structure, which essentially ensures that we have the youth voice reflected in every aspect of what we do, whether it's our policy development, whether it's our media and communications, whether it's our interaction with the communities, etc. Of course, in a party structure, the youth historically in every ward or whatever, you have a youth leader and so on. So it's not as if the structures have not been there, but the way in which they've been conceived and used, I think, has not kept up with the times. And so for us as a campaign team, it's central. And right from day one, actually, right from the first meeting that we had, I insisted that when this whole idea first came about, and we were going to have the first meeting of, it was like 8 of us in a room, I insisted that we needed to have a youth voice in that room, even as small as that meeting was then. And we did have a young man who was quite helpful in those discussions. It's about since late 20s, I think. And so it's central to everything, you know, that we do, and obviously in our messaging and our outreach, etc. You know, we're seeking to target and talk to the youth, because actually a lot of the problems that we've identified disproportionately affect the youth, right, in their impact, whether it be health, whether it be education, jobs, ease of doing business, all of these things that we talk about. If public resources are diverted from public use to private pockets, who are the people who will bear the brunt of that, right? We are going to bear it in the quality of their education. We're going to bear it in terms of the underlying growth of the economy. It's that growth that creates jobs. Government cannot employ all those people. We need in Lagos to be running very fast. Lagos is a growing city. It will continue to be. There's no point bemoaning our fate. Lagos has been like that for eons and will continue to be that way. It's a cosmopolitan city. It's a leader in its national context. And so, like New York or London, you should expect that Lagos will continue to be a magnet, you know, within its geography. And we just need to ensure that, you know, we as leaders are not standing still. We're investing ahead of that growth, and we're doing things that will provide multiplier effects, you know, that will harness, you know, that energy of its people and its youth as a strength, and facilitate activities, growth, new businesses, new endeavors, etc. Whether small businesses that are just getting started, or attracting big businesses who see a big commercial market, a port city that has a large population attached right there on the shores. Which is not something that's, you know, which is I mean, it's quite an endowment, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So all of these things, as a leadership, we have to intentionally say that over the next 25 years, what are we going to do? What are we going to do over the next 25 years? You have to have long-range plans, but you also have to have short-term, you know, programs that are tied into those long-range plans. What is it that we're going to do that is going to enable us to keep pace with the growth and development of this city, such that in 25 years' time, you know, we'll not have gone, you know, in one direction with population, and in another, you know, less favorable direction in terms of growth and development. And this, by the way, when you look at other countries like Singapore, for example, and you know, when you study like Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, and those early years, this was one of his principal concerns, right? Which actually drove a lot of the decisions that they made, which resulted in development. It's one of his principal concerns was, how are they going to provide an environment that will provide jobs and absorb the population, the youth, over time. And they were a small nation, they were an island nation and all of that stuff. They were, you know, they didn't have all of the resources that we do. But he also was thinking ahead. So if someone like that is thinking ahead, think about what Lagos needs to do. Fortunately, yeah, Lagos has, you know, resources which it can deploy. We have bright people, a lot of bright people. We have a history of commerce. We have a history of attracting folks to come here to do business, who come here to seek opportunity, including foreign companies, etc. We have this rich history. I mean, it goes back centuries, by the way. It's not a
Right.
modern thing. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not something that
Right.
you know, is since independence. It goes back centuries. Lagos is a it has long been a commercial center, and I think we just need to harness that with the right
Yeah.
leadership. I think in a
Right.
generation we can be in a different place.
Yeah, leadership, leadership, leadership. It's all about leadership. Society and nation is rise and falls on leadership. There's a comment here by Oloru Toba saying, I think you are ready to lead Lagos State, but you also need legislative support. What are the chances of your party in the Lagos legislative elections? And I'll tie that into my question again, still dealing with the youth, because that's a huge margin that I believe your parties are targeting as a new set of people to bring into the voting age and first time voters most likely. There's a lot of restive youths all over Nigeria, mostly in Lagos, because Lagos is an exploding city. I think the population is well over, is it close to 20 million now? I think.
Depends on who you ask. Between 20 and 30.
How do you think between 20 and 30 million? Exactly. So with the question about how would you get your party to have one side of it? But I think as well that a lot of the youths will be looking for your party and you, Funso Doherty, to have a measure of social contract. What kind of social contract can you have with these youths who are very restive and very rightfully so expectant for leadership to take charge of the affairs of Lagos State? So question number one, how would your party work with a favorable legislative to drive your vision? And then secondly, how can you, as our governor, have a form of social contract with the youth for their supporting you?
Okay, thank you. So first is to say that yes, we recognize that it's important to have a full ballot where you have both a governorship candidate as well as candidates for legislative office, whether at this national or the state level. Probably most important for the governorship office is the state legislators. So the members of the State House of Assembly, of which we have about 40 in Lagos, roughly. So we do have a ballot. We do not have the full 40 candidates. We have a good number who will be contesting for office alongside me. And those two elections, by the way, are conducted on the same day: the State House of Assembly and the governorship. So there's a synergy that operates between them. So yes, we do have a slate and plans for that, and our goal is to ensure that as we succeed in the governorship race, we also populate the House with a significant, call it significant number, also of our own legislators. We don't need to control everybody. We don't even actually need to be majority, but we need to have a significant. We need to have a significant presence in the State House. Now, with respect to your second question, which has to do with the youth and social contract. So, I mean, I don't know, social contract may mean different things to different people, but I think the most important thing is to recognize that, a lot of the time, we as an older generation, we produce the younger generation. And we have a responsibility to the younger generation, right? And if we do a good job of managing what is entrusted to us, then they will emerge and grow into a space that is welcoming of them, right? And that is not, in effect, a hostile environment in which they can only be victims. And I think that that is central to our message. So when I think about, and as this relates to my earlier comment, when I think about who are the biggest beneficiaries of, who would be the biggest beneficiaries if we succeed in what we're setting out to do, as we succeed in what we're setting out to do. You know, at the end of the day, it is these kids who are disenfranchised, almost, you know, on the margins of society. The only time when they are viewed as important is when people are trying to get them to the polling booths on the polling day to get their numbers up. And we just have to change that narrative so that these folks who are seen, so someone was interviewing me the other day and was asking me, you know, what are we going to do about area boys, and kept saying area boys. And I said, you know what? I actually don't like the term area boys, right? Because it's almost sort of like, you know, it's almost sort of like there's a dehumanizing aspect to it, right? Because these are people's kids, people's brothers, you know, nobody had a child to say, I want to have a child that's an area boy, right? So I think that, but I think it's in many ways a symptom rather than, you know, there's a symptom of other underlying issues. And as we fix those underlying issues through some of the things I've talked about on this call, you know, whether it's from education, whether it's the vocational options that I talked about, the curriculum, whether it's even our approach to ease of doing business, our support for small and medium businesses, etc., which enables those businesses, rather than praying and having government take a predatory approach to new businesses that are just trying to find their feet. If we take the opposite approach and say, look, as a government, fundamentally, we want to encourage this thing. We are less interested in harassing people from day one. We want them to find their feet. Yes, we want them to follow rules. We don't want them to be, you know, to be bad actors in society, and we should have mechanisms for stopping that. But beyond that, we don't want to, you know, we don't want to get in their way. We want them to be entrepreneurial. We want them to succeed. We want to help them. And, you know, if they can employ 2, 3, 4, 5 people, it helps government. You know, and government can almost put a price to that, right? And almost sort of invest that price in the support of those businesses, right? Because you also address a range of social issues. So more than anything, I think it's a mindset of understanding that we have a responsibility to these kids, that they are kids, and there, but for the grace of God, go either you or me or any one of any number of us on this call, and that we must create the society that is welcoming to them. And by the way, they can be a great strength for us if we harness them, provide for them, just as with any, you know, with any single individual. It's true of the collective.
Right. Thank you very much. As we're about getting towards the we're coasting towards the ending of this town hall meeting. So please, everyone, if you have questions for Mr. Funso Doherty, please share it on the chat.
There are a few questions in the chat.
I can't seem to see them now. Okay, do you mind reading them?
I'll read out a couple. Just gonna, so Ike asked about youth, but Anthony Awa said, curious to know what steps your party is taking to ensure those interested in getting PVCs are going to get them, and measures you'll be taking to ensure the integrity of the votes cast is maintained especially in the light of previous elections and current problems potential voters are experiencing obtaining their PVC. Did you get all that? So what steps are your party taking to ensure people are getting their PVCs? What are the measures that you are taking to ensure integrity of votes cast in? Yeah, 2 questions.
Okay, so thank you. So first of all, with respect to PVCs, I mean, there's a lot of public awareness going on. We also have done our own bit in terms of our media communications, trying to get the message out as a party and also as a campaign team. We've also done that. We've carried that message. We've also supported, particular, outreaches when folks have been able to come and get registered with INEC staff and all of that. So we've done that. We've also, as a party, obviously, our advocacy is also there at the national level. So we're doing it on a number of levels, and part of that advocacy is also ensuring that not just people get signed up on the systems or whatever, but that they actually get their PVCs. And so that's we are doing our own bit, but that's also a collective effort. And I think the noise level around that just needs to continue to be amped up and sustained, so that everybody's on their toes, most especially INEC. In terms of integrity of votes cast, I mean, so integrity of votes cast has many dimensions, because the antics of those who would take advantage of the system to pervert the electoral process, also takes many forms. So there's the question of voter suppression, for example, which is basically creating difficulties for people who are in, call it constituencies, call it geographies, that are likely to be problematic in terms of support for maybe a ruling party, to have those essentially have those votes suppressed because the conditions are made such that, it's almost impossible for people to go out there and cast the vote, whether it's by violence or whatever. So that's one. And, again, on that one, there's advocacy, there's focus, bringing focus on particular, because these geographies, by the way, sort of remain the same from one election to the next. So we know. So in Lagos, for example, we know certain areas where, you tend to see violence, and because if you don't have violence, you may have more votes, for a particular party than another. So since we know where those places are, the focus should be on those places from now, and it is. So in some of those areas, we've seen even the residents of those areas raising the alarm now that, they are being prevented from getting their PVCs. So there's a noise level. And this goes back to what I said about 2023 and why 2023 is likely to be different. There's a noise level around this where people are really engaged. And I think we just need to continue to even spread that message. And, I mean, we had a concert in Lagos a couple of weeks ago. It's around this whole PVC issue. You had young music stars and all of that stuff out there, pushing the message. So I think we continue to see that. I am actually, in conclusion, I am also excited about this electronic voting thing. will continue to advocate strongly that INEC should do everything necessary to be ahead of the game to ensure that there are no issues in the adoption and implementation and operation of that thing. Because as you know, one of the greatest tools to drive transparency, to eliminate corruption, and kind of bad behavior really is technology. Because when you introduce technology, sometimes there's nowhere for people to hide. And things that might take you decades and you never accomplish. Once you introduce technology, you'll be surprised that that thing, within a short space of time, a month, you might accomplish it, right? And that's why people fight the adoption of technology. So it's actually quite a coup that we got this thing written into the act, and it's I'm excited by it because it could be a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think we have the yeah. Go ahead, Odi.
Sorry, I see quite a few questions. So
right.
Funso, one of them by Ike Nwachukwu is on housing affordability and availability, which remains a problem for most in Lagos, despite the evidence of empty housing available. How do you plan to tackle this recurring issue in Lagos, which is a cause of serious angst among Lagos dwellers? Then very quickly, if you can follow on to that with the issue of how will you tackle housing? Emiromi asks, as we've seen quite a few candidates leave their parties once they don't get the positions they vied for. Would you be staying on in ADC if you don't get to win these elections? If yes, why? If no, why not? So housing, and then the question around staying on in a party or not.
Okay, thank you, Ike Nwachukwu, for that question. So housing is a big problem in Lagos. There's no easy solution to it. We have to have shall we say, a medium-term plan to address it. It's a plan that has to have both private and public sector elements to it. Right, and there will be no alternative to growing the housing stock, right? Just because of our population, and the notion of demand and supply, because that also comes in to determine prices, because it's a commodity like any other commodity, ultimately at the end of the day. I think government can do more. Where I think government can do more in the short term is not like building houses mass scale across the city, right? Because there'll be a limit to what government can do, and I'm not sure government is actually the most efficient or will be the most efficient sort of entity to be pursuing that. But government can do a lot in terms of setting the right context and de-risking the environment for private sector players to come in and almost on a partnership basis. By partnership now, I mean not necessarily a commercial partnership, but a partnership in terms of government providing the enabling environment, de-risking, providing guarantees when necessary, such that people can come in and deploy capital to create those housing, to create that housing stock. I know that there's a lot more capital. There's a lot more capital that can be deployed and that is available to be deployed and that is actually ready to come into these sectors once the right rules, the right arrangements are in place, and government is the best positioned, to provide that framework to encourage that capital to flow in. I spent many years managing pension funds, for example, and I know that there is no shortage of capital, long-term capital, to fund the right projects that have the right frameworks that are developed using the right frameworks. And so my government will do a lot to encourage, support, facilitate the entry of the private sector to do that. And capital goes where it is where it's safe and will earn a good return. So these are some of the things that government can help to facilitate. Mm-hmm. This is what happens elsewhere in the developed world, by the way. So in the US, for example, many of you are familiar with, the Fannie Mae's and the Ginnie Mae's and all of those types of agencies that exist to provide, some risk mitigation so that the private sector lenders who are like the mortgage banks and all of that so can come in and do what they do best. And then where it's necessary, I have also said that, I think that on some level, we should explore what safety net programs, right, are appropriate in the context of Lagos. And safety net programs can relate to subsistence programs, they can relate to housing programs, but these are programs that will relate to the most vulnerable. It's not a resort to, communism or socialism or around socialism, but it's a recognition that there's a redistributive aspect, a redistributive role, that government can play even within a primarily capitalist system to provide that means of reducing the inequalities and the real sort of to reduce the real suffering that exists at the most vulnerable rung of the ladder. So this is something that
right.
That we also sort of advocate as it relates to housing. Yeah.
Okay. Already, I'm just to manage our time. How much time do we have left for this town house meeting?
I think it depends. There are quite a few questions. I think folks should people should have their questions answered to the extent that we can take them. There was a question on leaving the party or not. I think you can take that very quickly, and then there's more.
Okay, yes, I omitted that question, and I apologize, Yemi, for that. So it's inadvertent. So I think that so we're not talking about losing at this point. We're talking about winning.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But with that said, I don't have any. I'm not harboring any such thoughts at this point. I mean, obviously, one should never speak about the future in sort of, absolute terms. But I don't see anything today that says that is the course of action that, should, in the unlikely event that we're not successful in our run for government, that is the action that I should take. Obviously, there are very strong and valid reasons why that may be an appropriate course of action. Then we will deal with that at that time. But I don't see.
Yeah, there's a question. I just find my chat is working here. There's a question that just deals with the level of decay of public structure as a nation, and also Lagos as well. It's by Kalu. He or she says, how do you intend to tackle corruption and waste of resources in public institutions? For example, it is almost impossible to get into School of Nursing in Lagos State if you don't have money to buy a slot or a godfather. That's shocking. So bottom line, corruption within our public sector in Lagos. How will we deal with this monster called corruption? You know, it's with us.
No, it's with us. It's with us, and you know, it's been with us for a long period of time. You know, like I said, the first thing is the first step in that is the reform of the public service. Right? There's no shortcut to it. There's just no shortcut to it. You need to go in there. You need to let people know that this is what is acceptable. This is what is not. We will treat you right. We'll compensate you fairly, but we'll insist that every public officer who is occupying a position of public trust, and that's what public office is. If you're in public office, you're occupying a position of public trust. Everybody who occupies that seat will exercise that trust for the benefit of the people who repose that trust in you, which is the public. And we will insist on it. Now, there's this sense that, well, is it possible, you know, corruption is like, you know, cannot be dealt with and so on and so forth. And we just don't buy into that. And if you buy into that rhetoric, then it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? But if you insist that this is the direction, you signal it, you put the measures in place that are ancillary measures. So, you know, these other things that I've talked about, ensuring that people are well reasonably compensated and feel a sense of pride in their work. Then you insist. And then you also bring out the stick. So you bring out the carrot and you bring out the stick. And you make examples of people, right? And you know, it's nothing sort of sends a signal more than when there are consequences, right? Rewards alone don't work. Consequences alone don't work. But rewards and consequences have been proven to work across the world. And Nigeria should be no different. What you need is a resolve from the top. And you need it in that resolve, for that resolve to happen, you need to have the right people in the positions of leadership. Otherwise, you know, one, they will not insist on it. Two, the people will not take it seriously. And three, they would not be in a position to act to give teeth to what they're saying, because they're in a glass house, as I keep saying. So it can certainly be done. That thing we talk about, the nursing home or whatever, nursing school, and you know, people having to pay, that is just somebody abusing their public trust. It's just somebody abusing their public trust. And that should be called out. And if it's proven, that person should be prosecuted. It's just as simple as that. You know, sometimes in Nigeria, I shouldn't say in Nigeria, but sometimes we nuance things that ought to be black and white, right? And then we make things black and white that ought to be nuanced. You know, if somebody is doing something that is corrupt, is betraying a public trust, it essentially is selling a spot in a government school and taking the benefit for himself and depriving somebody who ought to be in that school, who's qualified to be in that school, from being in the school. I mean, we should just call it what it is, you know, and say that we want a system where that is not the case. And we can have a system where that is not the case. And other nations have systems where that is not the case. And they've gone from third world status to first world status. And we want to make that transition. And the only way we will make that transition is if we address these things. Because if we don't address it, we will never make that transition. We will just be here going round and round and round and round. You know, and people will keep telling you that Lagos is working, but because it's working for them, but it's not working for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. When this town hall meeting started, I obviously said that I've earned the right and familiarity to call Mr. Doherty Funso. The more we have this conversation and dialogue, I'm poised to call him my governor or our governor. It's quite refreshing with the way you answer your question with a huge measure of amount of sincerity. So my governor, our governor, incoming governor in waiting, Mr. Doherty, there's a question here. It says by Ms. Bafor, which says, what does good governance mean for you? And how would you implement it in Lagos State, given the context of Nigeria and our perceived integrity challenges? Okay, so that's a direct question to you about integrity challenges within our polity and politics and structure. Then also linked to that is it is a likely, we'll take both. It says it is a likely event that if you win, the reality is that your legislative arm will be dominated by other parties. What is your plan to drive Lagos forward in a situation like that? So, but again, integrity issues, dealing with our polity as Lagosians and Nigerians, and then how would you work with a multiplicity of players within your legislative arm of government once you take the seat of governance in Lagos State? Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gubernatorial Bafo. Good leadership, what does good leadership look like? I mean, you know, if you ask, 10 management experts, they will give you 10, maybe 10 definitions. But at the end of the day, to me, leadership, particularly in the public space, has to do with bringing someone who brings vision and who operates with character and with competence, and who exercises, who understands the sacred trust that the office they occupy represents, and is committed to discharging that trust in the interest of the people, and is committed to putting the interests of the people before his own personal interests. To me, that's at the heart of it. And it's like a foundational definition. And then other things emerge from it. Because with that lens, you can determine whether actions are examples of good leadership or whether they are examples of bad leadership, right? Because it's a lens that allows you to sort of measure up, your actions, your motivation, even the things you say, all have to be filtered through that lens. And to me, that's good leadership in a public sector context. I mean, there are all the other things which, exist in terms of competence, in terms of leading people, in terms of managing people, in terms of inclusion, in terms of being forthright, in terms of being open, having good judgment, being disciplined, and all of that. All of those, are sort of higher order things, I think. But at the root of it is those fundamental values. So I'm really sort of a values-based leader. If I had to sort of think about the lens by which I think about leadership, then integrity. How do you intend to do this in Lagos? I think I've spoken at length about this, so maybe I don't need to talk more about that to avoid repetition. Now, legislative. Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that our House of Assembly will be controlled in a Funso Doherty governorship, will be controlled, by another party. Like I said, we have a slate, but I think it's not necessarily the case that we need majority again to be effective. I think if we have a significant presence in the House, we can be effective. I think also it's important to recognize that part of the power that the legislature has, or appears to have, is a function of the fact that they are controlled in a way by the same government. In other words, when governments change, right? So should we be successful in securing the executive arm of government, for example, you and some proportion of control in the or some proportion of representation, significant representation in the legislative house, you will find that pre-existing loyalties and pre-existing, alignments, will change when power changes. That's just the nature of things. So it's not the case that no progress can be made, even in a government that is in a government that has an executive on the one hand and a legislature that is controlled by folks from another party. Obviously, you will not have a railroading kind of authority, but there are different ways to exercise authority, and alignments change quite quickly, actually. And you don't need to change everybody. You only need some number. And by the way, let's not forget that not everybody in the ruling party is happy, right? So there's a lot of dissent in those ranks as well. And we see that. That's part of the opportunity that we see in 2023.
Very good. Please, already, my chart screen just disappeared. Any more questions?
Yes, one from Dr. Adeoye. I appreciate your responses, he says. We are where we are because our leaders mainly lack vision. Thus, I would like to suggest you envision Lagos in 20 years' time and tease out practical processes on bringing that vision to reality within a tenure or two in the domains of infrastructure, youth engagement, and job creation in a new world order driven by technology, security, in a new Nigeria, health and focused education relevant to sustain the new order. These are some of my suggestions you may wish to expand upon while elucidating your plan for a holistic new Lagos driven by technology. All the best. I think this is a question on sort of what's your vision for Lagos and where are and he's given you a few opportunities to say, tell us about your vision in the domains of infrastructure, youth engagement and job creation, technology, security, health education. So, take your pick and give us, that could be your wrap up, the Lagos you envision.
Okay, thank you. I think I've touched on it at various points in the course of this call, and I see that question as largely a comment and largely a suggestion, or largely suggestions, which I think is a good comment. And those suggestions are great in terms of always beginning with the end in mind. In other words, having a long-term view of what we would like to see in 25 years, and that's the whole essence of visioning, right? And then thinking about how you work back from there, and then how do you set plans and programs in place to get you there. And I alluded to this earlier. I mean, my vision for Lagos, which I've outlined in various ways, but I would say it is to essentially see a Lagos that takes its place amongst the mega cities of the world. Its rightful place amongst the mega cities of the world. A place that reflects the vast potential that Lagos has in terms of human capacity, human resources, natural endowments, geographic endowments, historical endowments, and that attracts the right kind of leadership that effectively transforms those endowments and potential to bring to life that vision of a mega city. And the evidence that we will see of that in terms of outlining and painting this vision, the evidence that we will see of that is a city with world-class infrastructure, whether it's transportation infrastructure, water, waste, power, technology infrastructure, security infrastructure, all of the things that you might think of as the skeleton of a modern megacity. Lagos has the opportunity to have a transportation infrastructure that is trimodal. We can do roads, we can do rail, we can do water. And we're underperforming in each of those areas. There's been a tremendous over-focus, in my opinion, on the road network. And indeed, on adding more cars to the roads. How can that be the solution to the problem? I see, for example, that Lagos State has just added some large number of taxis, right, to the roads. These are brand new taxis. And that's basically just like unleashing what I call it, an army of vehicles on the roads that are already congested. Some may say, well, they're putting new taxis on the road, but really, is that what we ought to be doing, right? And we've seen these schemes before. The new cars come on 3 or 4 years, they're not maintained. Within 3 or 4 years, they disappear. So we have to think about more fundamentally, what kind of transportation infrastructure do we need, and how are we using the channels of transportation that we have effectively? Our waterways, for example, rather than these bespoke operations that we have, we should have a full-fledged ferry system that at least takes care of a number of axes of travel. The rail network that we've been building for, donkey years. We need to understand why that is. Why is that? Why is that? Further evidence, we'll see further evidence in things like other aspects of infrastructure, whether it's the way we deal with our waste, the way we deal with our environment, the way we deal with power, all of these. And even before we leave the question of transportation infrastructure, the whole notion of law and order and the effect that law and order has, even on the effectiveness of the existing infrastructure that we have, is an important component. If we don't restore that law and order, the infrastructure that we have will never be enough, because we will build more roads, they will be misused, they will be abused, they will be taken by people who are, essentially operating them lawlessly. And so we, the citizens, will not get the benefit of that. And so that is important. Now, I've talked about my vision around health, education, etc. It should be the case that people do not opt away from government's provision of these, right? Wherever government does in each of these areas should be of a quality that people naturally go to it, right? And are confident in going into it, right? So the woman who needs to have a baby is not reticent to go to a government hospital because she doesn't know what she's going to meet there. And will not sort of leave that option to go to a less safe option, right? Because that's where she's made to feel comfortable. So these are all aspects of it. So I think that I could paint it in much more detail and technicolor in each of these areas. But I would just say that at the heart of it and at the root of it, what will produce these outcomes in each of these areas, beyond the vision that we have for each specific area and the vision that we have for Lagos collectively as a city, at the foundation of it would be the reform of the public sector, the reform of the civil service, putting in place a government that is essentially working in an unbiased way for the interests of the people. Because then that is when you will see decisions that are made and consistently made over time in a best practice way in each of these policy areas that will then produce the outcomes that we want to see. These outcomes are not produced in 1 year, they're not produced in 2 years, they're not produced in 3 years. This long-term vision outcomes that we're talking about. Yes, we will see progress along the way. But we're not going to become a first world nation in 10 years, right? Singapore went from third world to first world in roughly 30 years, right? And it's not a trivial accomplishment, but it shows that it's doable, right? But at the foundation of what Singapore did, was that they said they're going to have leaders in place who know what they're doing, and they're going to insist that people do the right thing. And they're going to have zero tolerance, right, for people who come into public office and not do the right thing. Yeah. And they insisted on it. And they made examples of those who had the misfortune, or call it temerity, to test their resolve. And I think that is something we can aim at. We may not accomplish it from day one, but we can send the signal from day one, right? And operate on that basis. And with time, we will. It's almost like an organization. If you go in and you start to change the culture, it doesn't happen overnight. But once the signals are clear, the incentives are clear, what you reward is clear, what you punish is clear, you begin an inexorable march towards where you want to be.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Funso, for your comments and well answered, in-depth answering. We really appreciate it. I think we're just about wrapping up now. We've taken all the questions we can. There's one question about renewable energy, but I'll tie it into maybe a closing statement. So, Mr. Doherty, Funso, our incoming governor of Lagos State, God willing, you've defined yourself as Mr. Vision, Mr. Character, Mr. Competence. You will have a leadership that is value-based for Lagos State. You have an audience of well over 100 people at one time. What is it? How can we help you accomplish this Herculean task? Where can we be of value? individually and collectively, to support your mandate. Mr. Doherty, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's quite simple. First of all, I need you all to understand and believe that it is possible to accomplish the removal of the existing ruling party in Lagos, because a lot of people think of them as immutable, right? And we say that no, actually that dominance is a mirage. It is, yes, they've remained in power, but it's only because the vast majority have chosen to stay away. So we need those of you on this call and those we continue to engage with, this is our message, to know that it is actually in our hands to determine if they will remain in 2023 or not. It is in our hands. We are the ones that will determine it. That's one. Two, for those of us, this is a community. So we have something called a communities-based strategy, where we're out there talking to different communities of people and spreading the message to different communities of people. And so this is a community. You guys are a community. And what we've had a conversation today, what we've had today is a town hall with this community. Now, each of you has a number of communities to which they belong. So our hope would be that we have won some advocates, hopefully all of you, but certainly a large number of you, and that you will carry the message and be advocates in the other, if those other communities, those are other communities that you'd like us to have a similar kind of engagement with, if it's a different group, we'll be happy to have those engagements. Because at the end of the day, this endeavor, we will achieve this endeavor because it will be carried on the backs of those who understand the importance and the significance and understand the role that they individually can play in bringing it to pass. So the second thing, so one, believe that it is possible and that we are the ones that can make it happen. Two, be advocates for us and give us opportunities to be advocates to your communities where you believe that those will be of value. And three, the work that we do, as you know, in all campaigns have to be funded. So to the extent that you buy into what we're doing, we're not the type of campaign that is funded by, the vested interest that we're trying to fix, because traditionally it's the case that, people will fund campaigns and it's a commercial venture with the idea that, it's an investment that is recouped from the operations of government subsequent. So it should be clear to everybody on this call that that is not a campaign financing model that can work for us, given what we're setting out to do. So at the end of the day, we rise and fall on the support of folks who believe that this is something worth supporting, and this is a desired future, and that's another area where folks can be supported. The final area, I think, is around policy, and I alluded to this earlier, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to engage with some of you. And those of you who have ideas should please not hesitate to reach out as we're putting together, the details, dotting the I's and crossing the T's of our policies in these areas, which are living documents anyway. But to the extent that there are good ideas, and I'm sure there must be good ideas from a house like this, we will be very welcoming of them. And look forward to that partnership in helping to think about what the solutions are. Because government, as you know, is a collective endeavor, and part of leadership is in understanding, where good ideas are likely to come from, and giving the room, for those to flow into the policy process. So I hope that outlines it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Funso, for a very insightful, in-depth town hall meeting. There is on our chat box ways you can connect to this great work that is happening in the state of Lagos. You can go to Linktree with the QR code, and people can scan and plan to donate to this great initiative and effort. You can sign up to be a volunteer as well, and access all other social media information and that's available to all of us. Okay, I think that said, there was a question that it was about how can people from the diaspora get involved and vote. Okay, this is just what I'm suggesting to people, that the stakes in Lagos, particularly for this upcoming election and in Nigeria in general, are way too high that I would suggest most of us plan a vacation around the election season. You will be able to get back out of the country after the election, I promise you that. So that way we can have a mass return of people who are the registered voters to cast their ballot for the right candidate. It's not a too costly tax for us, because the stakes are absolutely very high for the nation, Nigeria, and Lagos in particular. So that's my suggestion for those who are concerned. A lot family of us from Doctors for Change actually reside outside of Nigeria, so we can make that change. We can be part of the foot soldiers that can advocate for this true change in Lagos through Mr. Funso Doherty, and even at that, through social media and getting involved, like I just said earlier on, be a foot soldier, plan a mini vacation around the electioneering season to be part of this great move that's happening in our nation, Nigeria, and Lagos in particular. So on behalf of Doctors for Change, if there are no other questions, commentaries from Mr. Doherty, Funso himself already, we would like to appreciate everyone for their time well spent, I believe. We've been greatly informed and enlightened about what we need to do to get this mandate across. We have a Herculean task of making this possible, but it's not impossible. I like when Funso said it is not impossible. We just need to believe that we can get that shift of 1 to 2 million average new voters into vote, and they will vote rightly. So we can do it, and it's very possible. So thank you very much, everyone, again, for your participation and your attention and your rapt attention towards this town hall meeting. That will be it. We are going to sign out now, and may God be with us all, and have a good night. Thank you. God bless Lagos. God bless Nigeria.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.